the ragged woman too scared to even speak. The hijacker leader sneered, sending a ripple of mockery and fear through the cabin. The girl in the back row stayed silent, her eyes dark as if death itself didn't concern her. No one knew that her silence was only waiting for the moment to erupt. And when the SEAL commander placed a gun in her hand, the cabin froze. The passenger they thought was trembling was in fact an undercover agent, erased from national records. Her name was Maya Torres, though nobody on that plane knew it yet. She sat in the last row, her torn backpack clutched tight against her chest, her plain gray sweatshirt frayed at the cuffs. She was 26, with a face that could have been beautiful if she hadn't looked so worn down, her dark hair pulled back in a messy knot. The other passengers barely noticed her when they boarded, their eyes sliding past her like she was part of the scenery. Someone who didn't belong on a flight to New York. Someone who couldn't afford it. A few had whispered about her earlier, their voices low but sharp, wondering why someone dressed like that was even here. Maya didn't flinch at their stares. She just kept her head down, her hands steady, her breathing slow like she was counting every second. The flight had started like any other. People shuffled to their seats, stowing bags, scrolling phones settling in for the long haul from Los Angeles. Maya had chosen the back row on purpose, near the galley where she could watch, without being watched. She always did. That picked a spot where she could see the whole cabin, where she could blend in. Her backpack patched with duct tape sat on her lap. Inside was nothing fancy. A water bottle, a dog-eared paperback, a folded photo she never looked at but always carried. The photo was creased, showing a younger version of her standing next to a man in a suit, both of them smiling in a way she didn't anymore. A woman in a tailored blazer, her nails painted crimson, leaned across the aisle before takeoff, her voice dripping with disdain. "Excuse me, miss, are you sure you're on the right flight?" She asked loud enough for nearby passengers to turn. Her eyes ran over Ma's worn sneakers, her lips curling slightly. "This isn't the bus station." A few people snickered. A man in a golf shirt nudging his wife. Maya lifted her gaze, meeting the woman's eyes for a moment, her face blank, but her fingers tightening briefly on her backpack. "I'm where I need to be," she said, her voice soft but steady, then looked away. The woman huffed, muttering to her seatmate about standards as she adjusted her gold bracelet. Maya's shoulders stayed square, her silence louder than the woman's words. About 2 hours in, everything changed. 4 men stood up at once, their movements sharp and coordinated. They were Middle Eastern, their faces hard, their eyes locked on the cockpit. One of them, Khaled, the leader, bellowed in rough English, "This plane will strike at the heart of America." His voice cut through the cabin like a blade. Passengers screamed, a child wailed, and the air turned thick with panic. The other 3, Omar, Rashid, and Youssef, moved fast, pulling knives and what looked like bombs from their bags. The bombs were fake. Maya could tell from the way they held them, too loose, too casual. But the knives were real, glinting under the cabin lights as they waved them at the crew. The flight attendants tried to stay calm, but their hands shook as they were zip-tied to their seats. A man in a business suit, his tie already loosened, shouted something defiant, and got a fist to the jaw for it. Omar leaned over him, snarling, "Sit down, or we kill you all." The cabin fell into a tense, shuddering quiet, broken only by muffled sobs and the hum of the engines. Maya didn't move. Her hands stayed on her backpack, her eyes tracking every step the hijackers made. She wasn't trembling, wasn't crying. She just watched her face blank like she was studying a chessboard. As the hijacker secured the aisles, a teenage girl in a hoodie, her eyes red from crying, stared at Maya from across the row. "Why aren't you scared?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're just sitting there like nothing's happening." Her words weren't cruel, just desperate, searching for some kind of answer. Maya turned her head slightly, her eyes softening for a moment. "Fear doesn't help right now," she said quietly, then looked back at the galley. The girl blinked, confused, clutching her phone tighter like it could save her. A man nearby, his suit wrinkled over her, and scoffed. "She's probably too dumb to be scared," he muttered to his seatmate. Maya's fingers paused on her backpack strap, but she didn't look at him. The air around her seemed to tighten her silence, a shield. Hey, before we go further, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to share these stories with you, to walk through these moments together. It's just a small thing, but it keeps us connected. All right, let's keep going. Khalid paced the aisle, his boots heavy on the carpet, his knife catching the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered with a scar running down his cheek like a warning. His eyes landed on Maya, sitting alone in the back, her head still down. He laughed a harsh bark that made the passengers nearby flinch. "Look at this one," he called to Omar, pointing at her. The ragged woman, so scared she's mute. Omar, wiry and twitchy with a smirk that never left his face, strutted over. He grabbed a fistful of Maya's hair, yanking her head up. "This girl doesn't even know fear." He mocked his voice loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. A few passengers turned their face as a mix of pity and discomfort, like they were watching a stray dog get kicked. Vanessa, a flight attendant with a tight blonde bun and mascara streaking down her face, whispered from her seat, "Please don't hurt her. She's just weak, her." Voice cracked like she was trying to convince herself as much as the hijackers. A woman in a silk scarf clutching a designer purse leaned toward her husband and muttered, "Why is someone like that even on this flight?" Her tone was sharp, like Maya's presence was an insult. Another passenger, a guy in a polo shirt, added under his breath, "Probably snuck on. Look at her clothes." The words piled up, each one a small cut. But Maya didn't blink. Her eyes, dark and steady, flicked to Omar's hand, still tangled in her hair, then back to his face. "Let go," she said, her voice low. "Ivan." Omar froze for half a second, then laughed again, louder, like she'd told a joke. But he dropped her hair and stepped back, his smirk faltering just a fraction. A businessman in first class, his Rolex glinting, leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're embarrassing yourself." "Sweetheart," he called out loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "Just sit down and stop drawing." Attention. His tone was like he was scolding a child, his eyes flicking over her sweatshirt with disgust. A few passengers nodded as if her existence was an inconvenience. Maya's hand paused on her backpack, her fingers curling slightly, but she didn't respond. Instead, she shifted her weight, her gaze settling on the businessman for a long moment. The air around her grew heavy, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking away. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a warning, one he didn't yet understand. Up near the front, Jack Reynolds sat in row 12. His broad frame hunched slightly to blend in. He was 42 with salt and pepper, hair and a face that looked like it had seen too many long nights. He wore a plain flannel shirt, jeans, no watch, nothing to draw attention. But his eyes were sharp, scanning the distances between the hijackers, the exits, the crew. Jack was a SEAL commander on a low-profile mission, traveling without his team. He had clocked the hijackers the moment they stood up. Their movements, too. Practiced their bags too heavy. He knew what they were planning. A repeat of 911, the plane turned into a weapon. His jaw tightened and he muttered under his breath, "I won't let history repeat itself." His hand twitched toward his ankle where a concealed pistol was strapped, but a quick pat down earlier had taken it. He cursed silently, then noticed Maya. She was different. While everyone else was shaking or praying, Maya sat like a statue, her eyes tracking the hijackers with a palm that didn't match her torn clothes. Jack leaned forward slightly, watching her hands steady as stone, and the way her gaze never wavered. She wasn't just some scared passenger. There was something else there, something he recognized from years in the field. Control, the kind that comes from training, from surviving things most people don't. Khalid stormed toward the cockpit, barking orders, "Lock it, set course for Manhattan's Twin Towers." The words hit the cabin like a bomb. Passengers gasped, some sobbing openly now, others clutching their seats. Omar grabbed the co-pilot, a young guy with sweat soaking his uniform, and pressed a knife to his throat. "Fly where we tell you," he hissed. The co-pilot nodded, his hands shaking as he punched in the new coordinates. A man in a pinstriped suit, Daman shouted from his seat, "Terrorists! The government will crush you." His voice was loud, desperate, but it earned him a swift kick from Rashid, who loomed over him all muscle and menace. Daman crumpled, blood trickling from his lip, his bravado gone. Maya's hand tightened on her knee, the veins standing out, but her face stayed blank. Her eyes locked on the scene. An older woman, her pearls clinking softly, turned to Maya from a nearby seat, her voice trembling but sharp. "Why don't you do something instead of just sitting there?" She snapped, her fear twisting into anger. "You're young. You're healthy. Help us." Her words were a plea wrapped in blame, and a few passengers nodded their eyes, accusing. Mia's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her backpack, pulling out the water bottle, unscrewing the cap with slow, deliberate movements. She took a sip, her eyes never leaving the older woman's face. The gesture was small, almost mundane, but it silenced the woman who turned away, her hands shaking. Maya's calm wasn't defiance. It was power coiled tight, waiting. Jack edged closer to her row, moving like he was just shifting in his seat. He leaned toward her, his voice barely a whisper. "I see you. You're not like the others." Maya's head tilted just enough to meet his eyes. "What are you planning?" she asked, her voice so low it was almost lost in the cabin noise. Jack's eyes narrowed. "I'm SEAL, but I can't do this alone. I need someone fast and decisive." Maya's lips barely moved as she replied, "If you give me a gun, I won't miss a shot." Jack froze his breath, catching. Her eyes were cold, not with fear but with something else. Certainty, the kind that comes from experience. "Who are you?" he asked. But she didn't answer, just held his gaze unflinching. Young mother clutching, a toddler who wouldn't stop. Whimpering stared at Maya from across the aisle. "You're just going to sit there," she hissed, her voice breaking under the weight of her fear. "My kid's scared and you're doing nothing." The accusation hung in the air, raw and desperate, drawing more eyes to Maya. A man in a baseball cap nearby muttered, "She's useless. Look at her." Mia's fingers stilled on her backpack, her eyes flicking to the toddler, who was clinging to his mother's shirt. For a moment her face softened her hand, reaching out as if to touch the child's tiny shoe. But she stopped herself. "Keep him close," she said softly, her voice steady but kind. The mother blinked, caught off guard, and pulled her son tighter, her anger faltering. The plane droned on the tension in the cabin like a wire pulled tight. Khalid stood at the front, shouting about martyrdom, about striking America where it hurt most. Passengers were breaking down now, some praying, others clutching each other. A woman in a red blazer, her face pale, whispered to her seatmate, "We're all going to die." A teenager across the aisle was rocking back and forth, his headphones tangled around his neck. Maya's fingers twitched, her eyes flicking to the galley, then back to Khalid. She wasn't praying, wasn't shaking. She was waiting. As the hijackers moved through the cabin, Yusuf stopped near Mia's row, his eyes narrowing. He reached down, snatching the paperback from her lap, flipping through it like it was evidence. "What's this? You think you're smart reading books?" he sneered, tossing it to the floor. The pages split open, revealing a photo, tucked inside the same one from her. Backpack of her and the man in the suit. Yusuf didn't notice, but a passenger nearby did, a woman in glasses who gasped softly. That's a government seal on his jacket." She whispered to her husband, her voice barely audible. Ma's hand moved to the book, picking it up slowly, tucking the photo back inside without a word. The woman's eyes widened, but Mia's face gave nothing away, her silence heavier than ever. Jack saw his moment when Omar turned to yell at a crying child. He reached down quick and smooth, pulling a tiny pistol from a hidden holster strapped to his calf. It was a last resort small enough to miss in a paytown. He slid it across the floor under the seats until it bumped against Maya's foot. She didn't look down, didn't flinch, just reached under her seat and palmed it, tucking it into her sweatshirt. Jack locked eyes with her. "This is your chance. Are you sure?" Maya nodded, her voice a whisper. "I've shot and killed before. Before I disappeared from the world." Jack's eyes widened, but there was no time to ask more. She gripped the gun, her knuckles widening, and said, "Wait for my signal." The cabin was a pressure cooker now. Khalid screamed, "10 minutes until glory. We all die for faith." His voice was wild, almost unhinged as he waved his knife. Vanessa, the flight attendant, whispered from her tied-up seat, "There's no hope left." Her voice broke her hands, twisting against the zip ties. Damien, still slumped in his seat, groaned, "I don't want to die like this." His face was bruised, his suit jacket torn. The other passengers were a mess, some praying, some staring blankly, some clutching their bags like lifelines. Ma stood up slow and deliberate, her backpack sliding to the floor. The movement was so quiet, so understated that it took a second for anyone to notice. Then heads turned, eyes wide as the ragged woman straightened her shoulders. Before she acted, a man in a tracksuit, his face flushed with panic, pointed at her. "What's she doing?" "She's going to get us all killed," he shouted, his voice cracking. Others joined in their fear, turning to blame. "Sit down," a woman in a cardigan hissed. "You're making it worse." Maya didn't look at them. Her eyes were on Khalid, her hands steady inside her sweatshirt. She took a single step forward, her sneakers silent on the carpet, and the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a promise one the passengers couldn't yet understand. In one fluid motion, Mia raised the pistol. The shot was deafening in the tight cabin, and Omar dropped a clean hole in his chest. The cabin erupted in screams, but Mia didn't blink. Jack was already moving his SEAL training, kicking in as he tackled Rashid, wrenching the knife from his hand and pinning him to the floor. Youssef spun, reaching for the fake bomb strapped to his chest. But Ma's next shot caught him in the leg and he crumpled, clutching his thigh. Khalid roared, charging at her with his knife raised. But Mia fired again, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. He hit the ground, his knife skittering across the aisle. The whole thing took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The cabin frozen in a mix of terror and awe. As the dust settled, a woman in a floral dress, her hands still shaking, stood up, pointing at Maya. "You're one of them, aren't you?" She accused, her voice shrill. "How else could you do that?" The words were a slap, turning heads toward Maya again. A man nearby nodded, his voice low. "She's too calm. It's not normal." Mia's hand paused on the gun, her eyes flicking to the woman, then away. She didn't answer, just knelt to check Youssef's pulse. Her movements precise, professional. The woman sat down, her face red, but the suspicion lingered, a new kind of weight in the cabin. The co-pilot, shaking but focused, grabbed the controls, shouting, "We're safe now." The plane leveled out. The course corrected. Passengers were still screaming, some ducking under their seats, others staring at Maya like she was a ghost. Damien, his face swollen, pointed at her, his voice trembling. "She killed like a professional. She's no ordinary passenger." His words hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Vanessa, still tied to her seat, leaned forward to her eyes wide. "Who are you really?" she asked, her voice a mix of fear and disbelief. The woman in the silk scarf whispered to her husband, "How could a homeless girl shoot like that?" The teenager in the headphones stared, his mouth open, his hands frozen on his phone. A flight attendant, not Vanessa, but a younger one with a trembling lip, broke free from her zip ties and stumbled toward Maya. "You saved us," she said, her voice choked with tears. "But why didn't you say anything? Why did you let them treat you like that?" Her question wasn't cruel, just raw, searching for something to hold on to. Maya looked at her, her eyes softening for a moment. She reached into her backpack, pulling out the folded photo, her fingers brushing the creased edge. "Didn't need to," she said, her voice quiet but firm, then tucked the photo away. The flight attendant stepped back, her hands twisting together as if Mia's answer was both enough and not enough. Mia lowered the gun, her face still blank, but her hands were steady. She didn't answer, didn't look at them. She just stepped over Omar's body and handed the pistol back to Jack. He took it, his eyes searching her face. "You're not just some passenger," he said, his voice low. Maya's jaw tightened, and for the first time, her eyes flickered with something, pain maybe, or exhaustion. "I was Lena Torres," she said, her voice barely audible. "Deep cover CIA vanished 5 years ago." The words landed like a stone in still water rippling through the cabin. Passengers gasped, their whispers growing louder. Jack stepped forward, his voice firm. "She's the reason you're all alive right now." As the plane descended, a man in a leather jacket who'd been silent until now stood up, his face pale. He held up his phone, showing a grainy photo he'd snapped earlier. Maya sitting in the back, her backpack open just enough to reveal a glint of metal. "I knew it," he said, his voice shaking. "I saw something in her bag. She's been armed this whole time." The accusation wasn't loud, but it carried turning heads. Maya didn't look at him. She just zipped her backpack closed, her movement slow, deliberate. "You saw what you wanted to see," she said, her voice calm but cutting. The man sat down, his phone slipping from his hand, his certainty crumbling under her gaze. The plane landed in New York, emergency lights flashing on the tarmac. Police and FBI swarmed the aircraft, cuffing the surviving hijackers and ushering passengers out. Maya stayed in the back, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her face unreadable. Reporters were already outside, cameras flashing, shouting questions as the passengers stumbled onto the runway. The headlines came fast. "Homeless girl on hijacked flight revealed his undercover agent." The story spread like wildfire. Maya's face quiet, unpolished. Fears plastered across every news outlet. They called her the Ghost Protector, a shadow warrior who'd stepped out of nowhere to stop a nightmare. In the terminal, as passengers huddled in groups, a young man in a hoodie approached Maya, his hands in his pockets. "I recorded you," he said, his voice low, almost guilty. "Back there when they were saying those things. It's online now." He showed her his phone, a blurry video of Omar yanking her hair. The passenger's cruel whispers audible in the background. Maya's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened on her backpack strap. "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice flat, but her eyes held his for a moment. And he stepped back, swallowing hard. The video was already trending, the comments flooding with outrage, calling out the passengers who'd mocked her. A man in a dark suit approached Maya, his face serious, his voice low. "M. Torres," he said, nodding respectfully. The other passengers froze their eyes, darting between her and the man. He handed her a badge, old but unmistakable, with her name on it. Lena Torres, the woman in the silk scarf, dropped her purse, her face pale. Damon, still nursing his bruised jaw, stared at the ground, his hands shaking. Vanessa, now untied, stood nearby, her eyes wide with guilt. I didn't know," she stammered. Maya just nodded, her face calm, and slipped the badge into her pocket. Then he walked in. Her husband, tall, broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity that filled the room without a word. He didn't need to introduce himself. His presence was enough calm, commanding, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. The terminal went quiet. Damon looked away, his shoulders slumping. The woman in the silk scarf clutched her husband's arm, her face flushed. Vanessa's hands twisted together, her eyes fixed on the floor. Maya didn't move, didn't smile, but her fingers relaxed on her backpack just a little. Her husband stopped beside her, his hand brushing her arm, and the room seemed to exhale. The consequences came fast, but they weren't loud. Damon, the businessman who'd called her a nobody, got a call from his company that night. His outburst on the plane, caught on a passenger's phone, went viral. By morning he was fired, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. The woman in the silk scarf, a minor socialite, found her sponsorship deals quietly pulled after her comments about Maya hit the news. Vanessa, the flight attendant, was suspended, her tearful apology on social media, doing little to stop the backlash. The woman in the tailored blazer who'd mocked Maya before takeoff was dropped by her charity board, her name tied to the viral video. The man in the leather jacket who'd posted the photo of her bag faced a flood of online hate, his account suspended for doxing. Years ago, she'd been different. A flash of memory. Maya, younger, in a crisp blazer, standing in a briefing room, her badge gleaming. She'd been one of the best, slipping into places no one else could. Her face forgettable, her aim deadly. But a mission went wrong. Someone betrayed her. Someone she trusted. She saw it again in the way her hands shook as she packed that night, leaving everything behind, disappearing into a life where no one would look twice. The photo in her bag, the one she never looked at, was from before. Her and her husband before the world broke her. In the terminal, as the chaos settled, a little girl, the toddler from the young mother's arms, toddled over to Maya, clutching a crumpled tissue. She held it up, her tiny hand shaking, and Mia knelt down, taking it gently. Thank you, Maya said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. The mother watched, her eyes wet, and nodded, unable to speak. Mia stood, tucking the tissue into her pocket. Her face still calm, but her eyes brighter, like a weight had lifted just a little. The girl's small gesture was a reminder not everyone had judged her. Now standing outside the terminal, Maya paused. The air was cold, the kind that cuts through a sweatshirt. Her husband stood beside her, silent, his hands steady on her back. She looked out at the city, the lights of New York stretching into the distance. The reporters were still shouting, but their voices were far away now. She didn't need to say anything. Her silence had always been enough. For everyone watching this is what it comes down to. The world can judge you, tear you down, call you names, but it doesn't know your story. It doesn't know the weight you carry, the battles you fought. You weren't wrong to keep going. You weren't alone in your silence. And when the truth comes out, it's not about revenge. It's about standing tall. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.